I'm Kathy Gutierrez, and this is Classlet 3, The Criminal Man. Today I have some help, so we'll have higher production values, and I know full well that some of you only watch to see the dogs, so I'm pandering. Okay, so now we're going to talk some about criminology. I told you that criminology would be coming in at some point. In 1764, this guy named the Marquis of Beccaria published this book called De Delicti della Pene, on Crimes and Punishments. And he had to do this anonymously because he was in fear for his life. Now, we're only 20 years away from the American Revolution, from the French Revolution. It does not seem shocking, and particularly for a marquis, right, who would have all sorts of power and friends in high places. But his main point was all individuals should be equal under the law. And he was so afraid of saying that, it was terrifying, right? So he had a number of reforms, no torture, end the death penalty, the accused should have some rights, and that the rich do not have a separate law than the poor. Okay, so this made perfect sense to all of the philosophers and, the enlightened thinkers, and, people were ready to embrace this. And the 19th century saw a complete overhaul of crime, including the creation of nationally run penitentiaries, the creation of a police force. You used to hire a guy to walk up and down your street. He was the night watchman. And I know that we've gone somewhat backwards in time here, but it used to be the case that there'd be like big ships off of the coast of London, and some guy would just own it, and you'd pay to throw criminals in them. They're just ships of floating criminals. Okay, so this is the century that people go from thinking about crime to thinking about criminals. And this guy, well, this is not a picture of him, this is his book, Cesare Lombroso, the founder of modern criminology, and, you know where I'm going, a huge spiritualist. Okay, so what does modern criminology, now of course completely debunked, thoroughly and completely, but how does one go about creating a theory of criminals, right? Not crime, criminals. Well, Lombroso is using the Darwin as progress model on the entirety of the world, on society writ large. There's this guy named Ernst Haeckel. Can you imagine naming a kid Ernst? Ernst! It's breakfast! Anyway, so of course he had some issues. A name like that, who wouldn't? And he created this theory, and he's the first guy to use this phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And what that means, right, is that he thought that embryos went through every stage of developmental progress on their way to being human, right? So they start off as like single-cell amoeba, and then they become little amphibious things, and then they get sort of reptilian, and right, and then this goes all the way up until they reach the apex of being human, right? Go team. Right? Well, I learned from my student Jennifer in Research Sim that he was actually an artist, which I had no idea about. And so we went running around and found he's got all these drawings of these, embryos, fishies and stuff. Completely worth looking up. Okay, so what people do with this, right, is they create a parallel between the individual and society, right? So if individuals grow up, then societies are thought to do the same. So what this does is this creates a sort of intellectual, religious ranking of humanity. So down here we would have, these so-called primitives, right? Aboriginal peoples. And next would be, you know, polytheists. Yeah, they're getting there, you know. But, you know, they don't have a good moral code. Right? This is how these guys would talk about this. And next, you would have the Jews, right? So monotheism, but not quite Christianity. And after that, Christianity. And then depending on who you were, that might even be superseded by scientific atheism. Now, who were the folks who, you know, perpetuated this? Well, a lot of people. So early anthropologists, E.B. Tylor, Fraser, the philosopher Hegel had a very similar theory. Of course, Hegel thought that the end point was Prussia, and since it no longer exists, that's a little, oops. Anyway, tricky. Okay, so Lombroso. Lombroso is using this gradated, right, theory of the evolution of societies. We've come so far from natural selection, haven't we? And he makes the argument, right, that criminals are atavistic, right, that they are actually throwbacks on the chain of humanity to some prior state. So they are born criminal. Now, he doesn't actually coin that phrase, someone else does, but it's used, you know, ubiquitously in discussions of Lombroso, to be born criminal. So this is overtly racist, but it also has very serious implications for punishment, because these people are not choosing to be criminals. So Lombroso says, you know, we got to get rid of the death penalty. He also says that things like jail and education will do no good. He says, for the love of God, don't teach them how to read, then we'll have smart criminals. Couldn't have that. Okay, so what he does, right, is he goes about creating a type. He uses craniometers, you know, measure your head. He measures the length of toes. He has he's obsessed. He's obsessed with ears. So how droopy your ears are, very important to whether or not you're a criminal. He collects skulls of criminals. And we were just reading last week in research where there's like a little thank you section for where he got all his skulls. So I'd like to thank my friend Dr. So-and-so for giving me this skull. Says he's not like the only dude collecting skulls. Anyway, which is weird if you think about it. So he ends up with this enormous collection of skulls. These are just a few. He was obsessed with Southern Italian crime. He himself was Northern Italian. He was also a Jew and an atheist until he found spiritualism. And he would, you know, so he measured all these things and created a criminal type. Of course, the dreadful irony is that 50 years later, it would be the Nazis using craniometers and creating criminal types out of Jews. But he had no way to foresee that. Okay, so what do all of these European intellectuals see in spiritualism? Okay. Number one, they do see it as compatible with current science, and in fact an extension of what is generally misunderstood as Darwinian evolution. It's also empirical, right? You just go to a seance, you check it out yourself. You don't need anyone to tell you about it. It's not secondhand. There's no faith involved. You go to a seance and you buy it or you don't. And he bought it. Like Galton, right? Fell hard. Lastly, there are things that intellectuals were not comfy with, right? Like miracles. And this explains them away or ignored them altogether. Right? So there's no final judgment, there's no anthropomorphic God, there's nothing, you know, sort of in any way sort of embarrassing intellectually about spiritualism, except spiritualism itself, which many people found embarrassing intellectually. But the guys who bought in bought in on its compatibility with science. Okay, so Lombroso will be our reading this week. So check out what he does in the creation of, the Born Criminal. And in a couple of weeks, we'll see Lombroso again, but this time with his favorite medium, Eusapia Palladino, and we'll see how he uses the same instruments that he uses to measure criminals on testing for the scientific veracity of spiritualist mediums. Okay, and with that, the Doglets and I bid you a good week. Enjoy the reading. I'll see you soon.